Hi there. Today we're going to make 5 easy recipes. Delicious desserts you'll be proud to share with family and friends. So let's get to it. I've included timestamps for each recipe so that you can look around and see which one you'd like to make first. But be sure to check out recipe number 3. It's a game changer. Picture this, a warm golden apple pie with a flaky lattice pie crust top right from the oven. Those cozy scents of cinnamon and baked apples, they're just filling up your kitchen. But guess what? You don't have to be a pastry chef to make this pie. It's easier than you think. Let's start by getting the apples ready. I use whatever apples I have in the crisper at that time. And I just use a regular apple slicer that you might use to eat your own apples. And it'll take about 4 to 6 cups. So that's probably about a 5-pound bag of apples. And just slice them. Make sure you get all the core out. And we call them the fingernails, the little pieces in the core, and then fill your bowl. So this time I'm actually going to cook my apple pie filling, partially cook it. And so we mix butter, brown sugar, white sugar, a little bit of salt, some cinnamon, ginger. Then let's mix that all together until it's well blended. And then let's pour all those wonderful sliced apples into the pot. And make sure you don't dump any on the floor. So let's zest in some lemon. That gives the apples a really lovely fresh taste. And you can see that the apples are starting to cook. And so just mix the cinnamon and sugar mixture. Give that a stir probably every few minutes. It's going to need about 10 to 12 minutes to cook. So our pie filling is almost ready. The smells are amazing. That cinnamon and a little bit of ginger and all the different varieties of apples that I've included. Really great. And the last ingredient that we're going to include is a little bit of cornstarch. And all of the ingredients, the instructions, the measurements are all of the recipe details are included in the description. So we'll let the pie filling cool just a little bit and head on over and get the pie crust ready. And while we're waiting, let's preheat the oven to 400 Fahrenheit. So I've greased the pie plate and we're going to get out one of the pie crusts. There's 2 in a pack, and let them sit out of the refrigerator probably about 15 or 20 minutes so that they're easy to unroll. And I like to put a little bit of flour on my pastry mat. It just makes it easier and so that the pie crust doesn't stick, because you don't want that. So that unrolled very nicely. And again, just a little sprinkle of flour. Old habits die hard. So I guess we didn't need the rolling pin for this one, but we will use it for the lattice pie crust top. Try to center the pie crust in your pie plate. And then the first thing we do is roll the edges under. And this will really make a nice crimped edge. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Don't be afraid to stretch the pie crust just a little bit. You'll have to do that very gently, of course, because you don't want to tear the pie crust. But if you do, it'll press together. Don't worry about it. So now I'm going to show you how to crimp the edges. So you just take your knuckles and kind of feed them together. So you see I'm using the knuckle of my index finger, and then I just push it in between my middle finger and index finger on my left hand, sorry. And that will give you a lovely crimped edge. And there's fancier ways to, there's all kinds of pie crust tips and tricks to finish your pie crust edge. There's braiding and all kinds of different fluting using spoons. But for me, this is the what I learned, the old-fashioned style, I guess you would call it. And I think it looks the best. But again, that's personal preference and whatever you choose. Presentation is everything, right? So now we dock, it's called docking, the bottom of the pie crust plate. And that just lets the heat and the steam rise up through your pie crust. So even though we put cornstarch in the pie filling, I'm still going to sprinkle a small amount of just all-purpose white flour over the bottom of this pie crust. And the reason I'm doing this is fruit pies can be very tricky to pull together. It's an easy recipe, but the last thing you want is to cut into this pie and just have a soggy mess. And we don't want that. I don't want that for you. So now I'll add that delicious cooled apple pie filling. Look at that. Isn't that wonderful? Just kind of pile it up in the center and then spread it to the sides. So we'll set that aside and get ready to make the lattice top. And using a pastry cutter, and I'm going to use the ridged side, just start cutting some strips. They'll probably be about 1/2 inch wide, and some might be wider. I just sort of eyeball it. If you want to measure, that's perfectly fine. So before we put the lattice on the top, I like to add some chunks of cold butter over the top of the apple pie filling. It just makes it so good and adds a richness to the flavor of the apple pie. And now we're going to add the lattice pie crust. So it's kind of like weaving a basket. Place your strips place your strips over the top of the pie filling, as I'm doing here, and you'll probably have some that are longer than you need. So that's just use your pastry cutter to even them out. And it's quite easy to move them around. So then we start to weave. And it's like every other piece. So we just flip one back, two back actually. So flip two back and then place the first cross strip. Again, you'll need your pastry cutter to trim. You may want to wait until you're finished before you do any final trimming. And don't worry about, you can move your, and you can see how easy it is to move the lattice if you need to, straighten it up. So you see here, I thought I'd get away with 4 strips across, and I'm actually adding in a 5th and making sure that it's evenly woven across. So we'll just keep trimming and weaving until that's completely done. So we're adding an egg wash now, and that's just a whole egg with a bit of water whipped in, or you can add milk if you prefer. So just sort of gently cover all of the lattice strips and the pie crust edges. The edges that you crimped before, make sure that those are covered with the egg wash. And this is what gives the pie crust that beautiful golden color once it's baked. And the final thing we're going to do is add some raw sugar or paving sugar. And that's just going to be sprinkled all over the top of the pie. I like to use those little individual packets. And I used it in another recipe in this series, and you'll see that in the Nutella cookies. Just gives it a little extra something, you know? And we're ready to put this beautiful apple pie into the oven. The oven is preheated, and I placed a cookie sheet on the rack, and that's to prevent any spillage, and it also helps distribute the heat evenly to your pie. Now the oven's preheated to 400, and I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes. See, it's already starting to get golden. So now we're going to reduce the heat to 375 because we want the pie to cook much slower. And to protect the pie crust edge so that it doesn't overcook and get dried out, I use this pie crust shield. It's a silicone shield, and it has a little hook on the side of it. I'll put a link to that in the description. It's a really handy thing to have. And there's our apple pie. Doesn't that look delicious? You can see baking. All of the pie filling has bubbled up onto the edges, the crimped edges, and I can't wait to cut into this pie. So let's put an big old scoop ice cream on that pie. How's that for a delicious apple pie? The crust is really flaky. The apples just have the right amount of cinnamon and spice. And look how cleanly it came out of the pie plate. No soggy mess at all. So I'm really happy about that. Let's try it. Really good. And I think the ice cream really adds to it. Up next in our pie crust series, a delicious cookie, and it's made with chocolate hazelnut spread, refrigerated pie crusts. So easy to put together, only 4 ingredients, and I think you're going to love it. We'll get one of the refrigerated pie crusts out of the box. There's 2. There's one. And I usually let it sit out for 15 minutes so that it softens up and it will unroll nicely, that we don't tear it. So I've floured. So I have a pastry mat out and I've floured it lightly. And I'm going to use about a 1/4 cup of the hazelnut chocolate spread or Nutella. And just put it on, not out to the edge. And we're just going to spread it in a circle. And leave the center bare. Okay, that's the spread. And the second thing we want to spread is this lovely apricot preserve. And what we'll do is we'll just kind of drop it at the end of the teaspoon.
because it would be hard to spread within the Nutella. And the oven's preheating to 350. The original recipe was 375. Way too hot, especially for this type of recipe, because in a pie you have lots of filling and that can absorb some of the heat. But in this case, we were just making very small cookies and they just overbaked. Okay. And we'll cut Hi, Ruby. And just like before, we cut from the outside in. I forgot that. And that keeps the center of the pinwheel from curling up. There. And I have my baking tray with parchment paper on it. And we'll roll them. Much better. And this time I'm making sure that the last little curl of the pinwheel is on the top. And if you don't like apricot jam, try something else. You know, maybe cherry or blueberry. That might work. Oh, I've got a little too much here. Okay, I'm going to finish rolling these and then I'll come back and show you the rolled cookies before they go in the oven. And the final steps, oh, there's my oven. The final steps are to brush the tops of the cookies with butter. And just a tip, when you're rolling up the cookies, just keep a little paper towel handy. It helps wipe off your fingers because they will get sticky from the Nutella and the jam. And it keeps them a little neater. You can see I didn't realize that until I was about halfway through, but you can do that if you like. They'll all taste really good. Okay, and then the final step is to sprinkle all of the cookies with this raw sugar, or sanding sugar, as it's called in some places. Of course, sugar. I like to buy the kinds that come in the little packets because it's not something you use a lot of. So there we go. I'll pop these in the oven. And this time I'm only going to bake them for about, I'm going to start at 15 minutes. And then we'll work our way up to maybe 18. So 15 minutes was exactly right. They're lovely and golden, and the pie crust is flaky. That's the way it should be. And yeah, there's been a little bit of jam. A little bit of the jam and the chocolate has run out a bit, but I think that's fine. And just to dress them up a bit, I'm just going to sprinkle a little confectioner's sugar over the top. So this time and temperature were exactly right. 350 degrees for 15 minutes. So time for the taste test. You can taste the apricot and the hazelnut, and the pie crust is really flaky the way it's supposed to be. Very, very good. So enjoy. And be sure to keep watching. We have a collection of 5 amazing dessert recipes, all made with pie crust. So good. While we're waiting for those cookies to bake, I'm going to make some delicious tarts. Now, some people call these tarts honey tarts or syrup tarts. And back in the day, that's what my grandmother called them, honey tarts. But you can call them what you want. They're absolutely delicious. Again, very little prep time, an egg, some brown sugar, and of course, a refrigerated pie crust. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is spray. And I'm spraying for 9 tarts. This recipe actually makes 18 if you use both pie crusts, but I'm just going to make 9 today. Just lightly flour your counter. And we'll take the refrigerated pie crust out of the package. Make sure it's at room temperature because that way it will roll out very easily. And I'm using a 3 1/4 inch cookie cutter. I'm going to use the plain edge, and that's what will make our tart shells. And we've almost got enough for the 9th one. And what I'll do is roll up that pastry. We're going to roll up that leftover pastry because we don't want to waste it, right? So here we have 6. And I don't like to roll my tart shells too thin because you don't want the tart to fall apart, right, when you try to take it out of the tin. Just roll it thin enough so that you can get 2 more tart shells. That should do it. There's 1. And there's 2. I've already preheated the oven to 350, so now we'll make the filling. 3/4 cup of brown sugar. And make sure the brown sugar is firmly packed. a 1/4 cup of very soft butter, one egg, and a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. And now we just mix all of this up. And it will be lumpy because of the butter. And then we just spoon the filling into the tart shells. I just like to go, whoops, we'll get that later. Just put a small amount in at a time. Just like that. Now I'm using my big spoon, but we're actually putting 2 tablespoons of butter tart filling into each tart shell. And a little bit more in that one. Okay, I'm going to finish up the rest of them and pop them in the oven. We're going to make some cinnamon roll cookies. Again, using our ready-made pie crusts. We have a mixture of cinnamon and sugar. So we're going to spread a little flour, and I have very little left in this bag, on the pastry mat. I'll leave a link below to this pastry mat. It's a wonderful tool to have in your baking toolbox. And the one I have been using, I just wore it out. And the pastry has come up to room temperature. That's always important, so that when we roll it out, I'm kind of all thumbs here. And what I love about this pastry mat is that it has a guide. So this sheet of pastry is about 12 inches. And the recipe calls for us to roll it out to 13 inches. And I'm going to show you how I do that. I'm going to pull this mat and not let my rolling pin roll off the counter. I'm going to pull this mat over. Because right in the mat, you'll see that there are measurements. So this is 12, and the outside is 14. So we want to roll it out so it's about halfway in between. And I'll do that using a French rolling pin, and I'll put a link to that below. These are really great rolling pins. They're simple, inexpensive, and it doesn't take much to roll this out to 13 inches. Gosh, almost 14. It has a non-stick surface to it, the pastry mat I mean, but I always put a little bit of flour down. So the first part is to spread 3 tablespoons of soft cream cheese over the pie crust. So I'm just going to drop, and I measured this before, it's about 3 tablespoons, more or less. You can also use the whipped cream cheese, but this is what I had on hand. And I use it for so many other recipes. So just take a spoon, just take the back of the spoon and start to spread it. Just lightly. You don't want to tear the pie crust. And get it out to almost the edge. So now we're going to mix up the cinnamon and sugar. So we need a tablespoon plus a teaspoon of granulated sugar, white sugar. And then 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. And we just want to mix that up. You can see that. Kind of like the sugar cinnamon you used to put on toast when you were a kid. If you did that, I think a lot of kids did. So now we're going to, as evenly as we can, sprinkle the sugar cinnamon mix all over the cream cheese. Cinnamon smells wonderful. And now, as tightly as you can, roll the pie crust up into a roll. Perfect. And then towards the ends of each, you want to cut off about 1.5 inches because it's just pastry, right? You're not going to see, you're not going to get any cinnamon there. And then you use a serrated knife. using a serrated knife, and keep a piece of damp paper towel to the side. Just slice those little cookies. They're about 1/2 inch. Slice the roll into cookies about 1/2 inch, and then place them evenly on your cookie sheet. They won't spread very much, but they will puff up. Is that a wipe? And you can see the nice tight curls of the cinnamon roll. Now I have the oven preheating. I'm going to bake these at 400 for about 15 to 20 minutes. And I always give a range because everyone's oven is different. So we got about 15 cookies out of that roll. We got 15 cookies out of that pie crust sheet. So 15 cookies out of that pie crust. And we'll make up the other pie crust, so that'll give you 30 cookies. And the last thing I'm going to do is brush an egg wash over all the cookies. And an egg wash is exactly that. It's just an egg with a little bit of water. And typically this is what we put on. Typically we always put an egg wash on pie crust so that it's nice and golden. And I haven't made these before, so I want to make sure that these little cookies get nice and golden and don't overbake. Okay, we'll put them in the oven for about, like I said, 15 to 20 minutes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And then when they're baked and cooled, we'll be putting icing sugar frosting. Oh, there goes the oven. And Ruby. Now that these amazing mini cinnamon roll cookies have cooled off, we're going to put a powdered sugar glaze on them. So you need half a cup of powdered sugar. Sometimes it's called confectioner sugar or icing sugar. And we need to mix just a couple of teaspoons. We need to mix a couple of teaspoons of water, 3, and mix it up because you actually want a glaze that drips and not a paste. So it's not like a frosting. So you can see what I mean. And I just use a small fork to mix the powdered sugar glaze. So position your cooling rack over top of a piece of parchment paper, and that will catch the drips. And we're just going to drop a little or a lot, depending on how much glaze you'd like. And you can always go back over the cookies if you don't feel they had enough, like that one. So they really do look like slices of a little cinnamon roll. There. Really easy and really good. We're going to make a fudge brownie pie as part of our 5-part series on store-bought pie crust, and you are going to love it. Now I've preheated the oven to 350, and I've also put a cookie sheet in. We're going to bake this pie on the middle rack, and the cookie sheet does two things. It convects, it helps the heat move through the pie, but it also prevents any runover. This is a deep dish pie, so the filling is going to rise almost like a cake and expand a bit in the pie shell. One of the first things I'd like you to do is, one of the first things we need to do is melt the chocolate. We have 2 cups of chocolate chips, and we're going to melt them in the microwave. You can see the chocolate is starting to melt. And what I've done is just put it in the microwave on 30-second bursts. That way you're going to make sure that the chocolate melts and that you don't burn it. Semi-sweet chocolate chips, and actually I have a variety in here because I was just using some leftover chips, have a tendency to burn because there's a lot of sugar in there. Okay, this is perfect. I only had to do this twice in the microwave, with the setting just on the 30-second burst, you know, the one that you use to reheat your coffee. And that will just keep melting because the chocolate is so hot. So let's just set that aside, but not for too long. You want to have all your ingredients ready. So I'm going to take a large bowl. I like to use these glass Pyrex bowls, and I'll leave a link in the description for you. So the first thing we're going to add is a 1/2 cup of melted butter. And then we need 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And they usually say packed brown sugar. So just push it down into your measuring cup. And I don't know if you can see, hopefully you can see, just a sec. I have these little clay or pottery bears in my brown sugar jar. Well, that's a medallion. There is a bear. There's the bear. And you soak these in water and then you put them in your brown sugar jar and they keep it really moist. perfect for baking. And of course, I've spilled some sugar on the counter, but that's me. So half a cup of brown sugar. We're going to stir that in. And then we need 3 eggs. Here's a question. Does anybody know why white eggs are cheaper than brown eggs in the grocery store? If you know, send me a comment. I'd love to know. Now we're going to, so let's stir that together. And all of the instructions will be in the description. I'm making these recipes just for my channel, Pie Lady Bakes with Grandma Judy. Okay. Let's put that to the side for a minute. Now we pour in the melted chocolate. That looks really good, doesn't it? And I like to use rubber spatulas because that way you get everything out of the bowl and nothing goes to waste. There. This pie makes up really quickly, and it would be a perfect pie for you to take, maybe for a dessert and coffee night if you had something like that with your neighbors. Next up is 2 teaspoons of instant coffee. Now, that's not something that you normally have on hand, but you can pick up a jar at the dollar store, like a really tiny jar. This is just for flavoring. This doesn't have to be like a premium brand of instant coffee. Teaspoon of vanilla. Always have vanilla. And we need now a half cup of all-purpose flour. I'm right at the end of this little bag, so I'm hoping. Yep, I have enough. It's like to make sure that you use all your ingredients up and check the expiry dates. I know I talk about that a lot, but it's really important. So there's the flour. And the last thing is a cup of chopped walnuts. So I guess we'll do half cup. And a half cup. So you can see that the filling for the pie is really just kind of like making brownies, right? So then just take a wooden spoon, or any kind of spoon, but I like wooden spoons. My grandma always used wooden spoons. And just make sure that's all mixed well. And you can see it's quite a lot of filling, right? Like I said. Okay. So now we're going to pour that into a frozen pie crust. To the side. So make sure that the frozen pie crust that you have is a deep dish pie crust. I'm going back to my spatula. And then we're just going to pour that lovely fudge brownie filling onto the frozen pie crust. Don't thaw the pie crust. So we'll get the rest of that filling. And you always want to try and put the filling into the center of the pie crust. The filling's quite sticky, just to let you know. And then we're just going to push it around. This is a lot of filling. I haven't made this recipe before, so we might have like mile-high fudge brownie pie. Okay, time for a little break. I hope you're having a coffee with me too. Okay, let's get that in the oven. And we're baking our fudge brownie pie at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 to 35 minutes. So I'm going to start at about 25 minutes, and then I'm going to increase the temperature as it bakes. If you've made it this far, but we're not finished baking, make sure you check out. And if these are recipes that you enjoy and would like to see more of, I hope you'll like and subscribe to my channel.